Hello, humans. I recently went to Canadian Tire and I ended up picking up this guy right here. This is the Cold Steel Kudo Light. It is a small folding knife named after a traditional, I don't really know if I should call this traditional South African or traditional British blade. It was made by the British and sold to the South Africans. But it is around for a very long time in and around that area right there. Some specs. I'll get into those in a minute. You have the warranty on the back. I like Cold Steel's warranty. I do think they do a fairly good job. It mentions that knives are extremely sharp, which makes me think that they're selling to idiots. And a Proposition 6. Oh, wait, this is slightly better than normal Proposition 65 warranty. It includes the fact that it is exposing you to nickel, which is known in the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects or other reproductive harm. But again, it doesn't, there's no leveling to it, so it's absolutely useless. Into the specs, we have a 4¼ inch blade of 5 CR15 MOV. Not what I would consider to be an acceptable blade steel, but sub $20 Canadian. We'll look past it for now. It is 2.7 ounces, blade thickness of 2 millimeters, with a 5¾ inch Zydex handle. Unfortunately, as you can see, in the time it took me to get home from Canadian Tire, something ended up getting dropped on the box, but it's still unopened. Oh. Here's its bag, its box. I do like plain cardboard box. You can recycle, do whatever you do with plain cardboard. I like that. Not a huge fan of the bag on the inside, but I can understand where they're coming from. Wow, this is a surprisingly large knife. Like, I understood at some level what 4¼ inch and 5¾ inch handle meant, but this is in hand much bigger than I expected it to be. So, yeah, it's big. Alright, so what we have here is an exposed spring slip joint, more or less. You have this big old back spring that goes over this rubber overmolded handles and offers a fair amount of force. You have a pretty solid half stop and then closed again. So immediately on the blade you have this very, very big piece of signposting with the model, and I'm assuming that's the symbol for this knife, the running antelope. Got a large clip point blade with a nail nick in it, which is quite nice. You have some type of screwed construction. I hope that those are captive, but I don't necessarily think that they are. And you have pin construction on the actual on the actual back spring itself. You have this stainless steel insert in the Grivex with this antelope horn motif, which I think is pretty cool. And on the back side of the blade, you have cold steel, the blade steel, and the fact that it's made in China. I don't think that that necessarily needed to be on the blade, especially not that prominently, but it is. The design does not feature a pocket clip, but has this very, it's thin. It's not a very wide knife, especially for the length, but all things considered, you can get a fairly good grip on it, and it's got this very, very slight curve to it, which fits quite comfortably in my hand. Choke up, get right behind the blade. There's definitely some hot spots here, mostly related to how thin this is and this exposed spring, but it's not super duper uncomfortable. It's big. It's a big old clip point blade. The plastic scales, they're not grippy. They're slightly textured in this sort of fake wood grain texturing, I guess I'm gonna call it. So they're, actually, you might be able to see that. Yeah, you can see it's very, very slightly textured, so you're going to get pretty good grip on it. It's actually easier to pull the blade out than it is to close it, just because you have so much leverage on this blade. You can grab all the way down here where the nail nick is, and you've got 3 inches of leverage on this back spring, which is quite nice to have. Wait a minute. Oh no. It doesn't quite look like it to begin with, but there is a seam down the middle there. So it is 2 pieces that have been attached together, which makes sense. The whole thing appears, sorry, I'm pulling this up. You can see there on the inside what appears to be phosphor bronze washers, which, is pretty nice to have. Like I said, this backstop is like, it's pretty good. And snap shut. It's got, the blade itself is quite thin, and it's got this sort of full flat, is that flat? Yeah, full flat grind to it, which means that this is probably a very, very efficient slicer, but it's a little bit big for a non-locking knife. Unless you live somewhere where you're not allowed to carry a locking knife for a variety of reasons, its size makes it a little bit awkward to carry, because for a knife this size, in order to justify carrying a knife this size, you probably have to do harder work with it. That's the reality. If you're carrying a bigger knife, you probably have tougher stuff to work with, or bigger cuts that you have to make, stuff like that. And as a result, you most likely do not want a slip joint knife. So this right here is definitely something designed to appeal to people who either can't or for whatever personal reason do not carry locking knives. And it does have some of that aesthetic historic flair, right? Like this, it's a little bit taken aback by the fact that the back spring goes on top of the knife, but this antler or antelope horn, I think they're called antlers. This antelope antler insert is very reminiscent of the shield inserts on traditional knives. And once it's pulled out, it is a fairly solid feeling knife. And in fact, holding this knife tightly actually makes it harder for the back spring to open because you're putting force on the back spring to keep it shut. It's not impossible, and it will pinch you if it starts to go. But like, I'm applying a not insignificant amount of force there, trying to get it into the half stop, and it's not gonna go on me nice and easy. Blade is, of course, picking up fingerprints like you would not believe. It's okay. You can't not talk about the size of it. It's big. It's big for a slip joint. I've said that already. I'm gonna keep saying it. That is what this thing is. It is a big old slip joint. It's pretty cool. If you collect slip joints, or if you are somebody who can only carry slip joints for legal reasons, this is going to be one of the biggest ones you can get your hands on. And I think that is super duper cool. It's not one hand opening, so if you live somewhere like Germany, although I believe that law only applies to locking knives, it is two-hand open, so there's that, which probably does help you. You can't remove the blade for cleaning, you can't remove the back spring for cleaning, which I get it, but it is somewhat annoying. Full flat grind, it's going to be an efficient slicer. It's just a big old clip point. I think this thing's pretty cool, I'm going to be honest with you. Real quick, let's do ourselves some size comparisons. So we've got our Wee Knives Banter and our Civivi Chevalier. It's huge compared to both of them. And then we have our Buck 110 right here, which it's bigger than the Buck 110, even just in blade length. I believe the Buck 110 is 4 inches exactly, potentially. And this right here is 4 1/4, so it is bigger than the Buck 110. And here it is next to a Zippo lighter. So this is a long object. It's not a very thick object, right? Like compared to the Buck 110, it is quite slim. Even compared to the Zippo, I think it's fairly comparable to the thickness of the Zippo, as you can see there. So it's not an insanely thick object, but it is very, very long, and it is, relatively speaking, tall. Again, not super tall, even compared to like the Buck 110 in terms of height. You can see the Buck 110 is ever so slightly taller, but it is still it's not a small thing to commit to carrying around. Alright, so let's just test out the factory edge. Keep in mind this is testing the factory edge on whether or not there's any significant nicks or if it's very, very toothy, which I do not expect this to be. Yeah, it's not the finest edge in the world. You can see there's one little tear in there, but it's not. It is sharp, right? yeah, there's one little spot right there where it may have just needed a little bit extra in the factory, but I mean, it's cutting perfectly fine. It's not rolling. It is pretty much what you expect from an inexpensive knife. It's factory edge. And speaking of inexpensive, this right here just meets my category for an ultra budget knife at $20 on the dot. 20 Canadian dollars on the dot. So for 20 bucks, I don't like seeing 5CR at all. I don't think that it is acceptable in a knife, period. At 20 bucks, it's starting to look a little bit acceptable, as much as I don't like it. And you are getting quite a bit of it here, right? As far as edge retention is concerned, you are solving the problem of having a particularly soft, not very great steel by just having a lot of edge to deal with. Same strategy that traditional slip joints used, where you may not have the best steel, but you have enough blades that it doesn't matter anyways. Not the hugest fan of this strategy, but I think that it does make a very, very cool knife. And again, for 20 bucks, I don't think that there's that much room to complain about it. That is all I really had to say about this guy. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.